if I could get everyone's attention. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you to all of those who I can't see online who are listening. My name is Nick Schifrin. I work for ABC News, and for the last 4 years, I was the correspondent and bureau chief in both Islamabad and Kabul. I've recently just moved to London and feel a bit like a fish out of water here, and definitely miss my old haunts. But we'll be talking about that a lot today, and no one's really interested in me. And this weekend, as you guys all know, I think, we have a conference coming up which the U.S. has been thinking about certainly for the last 1 or 2 years. It's in Chicago, and it will set the stage for the withdrawal. It will set the stage for how much the U.S., the U.K., NATO, and the West as a whole will support the Afghan National Security Forces. It's going to talk about how the U.S. and U.K. military will supposedly take a step back in the next year or two, and it's going to talk about, in very broad terms, about the exit strategy for the West. And what we are here to talk about is the humanitarian consequences of that withdrawal, of the exit strategy, and to well, that's a bit embarrassing. And to focus on the humanitarian consequences for Afghans going forward. Now, a few housekeeping bits, and that was probably perfect timing. Please first turn off or silence your phones, and I've done the same with me. I have to tell you that if there's a fire alarm, which is a continuous ringing bell, we should all make our way through the doors, through reception, downstairs, and then out the double glass doors in front. And this is on the record. So this is streaming live, and the video of this event will post online. So all of the questions and answers are all on the record. So we're going to start in Kabul, and hopefully our panelists will speak for about 5 to 10 minutes and then we'll come here, and I'll introduce these guys. And at about 11:45, if all goes well, I'll open it up to your questions. And the first person I'm going to introduce, we lose at 12 o'clock. So I would encourage you to ask her questions because it's an amazing opportunity to be able to ask her questions. So our first guest, I'll introduce quickly, is Dr. Sima Samar, who's there on the video on the right, in case you couldn't tell. She is the chairwoman of the Independent Afghanistan Human Rights Commission. She was the first minister for women's affairs post 9/11, post-Taliban government. She'll be upset that I've mentioned this, but she is a constant runner-up for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so we are in the presence of a future Nobel laureate. And what her work does now is she oversees the conduct of human rights education programs across Afghanistan, the implementation of women's rights programs and women's education programs, and monitors, investigates human rights abuses throughout the country. So it's a great privilege to have Dr. Sima here. Next to her is Ashley Jackson, who's a research fellow at the Humanitarian Policy Group within ODI. Some of you perhaps know her. She's worked in the Department of Political Affairs in UNAMA, which is the UN office in Afghanistan. She was head of policy for Oxfam in Afghanistan. She's worked with the Red Cross on relief operations in Southeast Asia, as well as in the Middle East and Kenya with NGOs, and her focus currently is on humanitarian principles and negotiations and peace talks, and we'll be speaking about that as well. And the distinguished panel on my right and left. On my left is Lucy Morgan Edwards, your right. She first arrived in Afghanistan during the Taliban regime to work on community-based projects both in Kandahar and Herat. After 9/11, she worked as an election monitor for the emergency Loya Jirga in 2002 and writes quite a bit about, and perhaps we could ask her about today, about some of the errors that the West made from the very, very beginning in Afghanistan. She was a researcher on transitional justice for the ICG, for the International Crisis Group, correspondent for The Economist, and a country expert for the EU during the 2005 elections. So, welcome, Lucy. And to my right, Dr. Stuart Gordon, last but not least, is at LSE in the Department for International Development. He was at Royal Military Academy before. He's the co-author of the UK government's Helmand Roadmap, which is basically the diplomatic and military strategy for Afghanistan, for the UK in Helmand specifically. He was also the lead researcher for the Helmand Quick Impact Project Program Evaluation and co-authored the strategy paper for the Helmand Stabilization Plan for 2011 and 2014. And so knows a lot about the use of development in conflict environments, and so it's a privilege to have him as well. So without further ado, let me go to Kabul. And Dr. Sima, if I could begin with you and ask kind of a fundamental question that I think will start us off today and I think is important for all of us to understand. How do Afghans right now feel about the drawdown of troops? How do they feel about the withdrawal of troops, and how do they feel about transition? What's their experience of transition been so far? And basically, what are they fearful of, and perhaps what are they hopeful of in terms of the humanitarian situation?